He adjusted his glasses, looked at both parties, and asked for a brief summary. Our lawyer stood first. He spoke clearly and without drama, presenting the fact, the date of the incident, the video from the barn security camera, the audio recording from the voice recorder, witness testimonies from Pete and 2 other neighbors, the documentation proving our land was outside HOA jurisdiction. Then he handed over the restraining order and described Karen's continued harassment even after it was filed. The judge listened without interruption, taking notes slowly, occasionally nodding. When it was Karen's turn, her lawyer stood reluctantly. He began with a tone that tried to sound sympathetic but couldn't hide the strain. He claimed that Karen had been under emotional duress, that she had misunderstood the property lines, and that she never intended to cause harm. Then, in a move that made Sarah stiffen beside me, Karen herself stood up. Without waiting for the judge's permission, she began speaking directly to him. She said she had been protecting the neighborhood, that the livestock posed a threat to property values, that she believed Sarah was trespassing on public land when the alleged incident occurred. She used the word alleged 5 times. The judge held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is not a zoning meeting. This is a courtroom. Please sit down." Karen hesitated, then sat, adjusting her neck brace dramatically as she did. The judge turned his gaze to Sarah and asked if she would like to speak. Sarah nodded. She rose slowly, one hand on her belly for support, and faced the room. Her voice was calm but firm. She told the judge how she had come out that morning to feed the goat. How Karen had approached her yelling, accused her of things that made no sense, and kicked her without warning. She said she had never filed complaints before, had never retaliated, and only wanted peace. Her voice didn't shake, even when she said the words "Karen kicked me while I was pregnant." The room fell into a silence that even Karen didn't try to interrupt. Judge Pickett folded his hands and leaned back. He looked at Karen, then at her lawyer, and finally back at us. He said he had reviewed the evidence personally the night before and found the case to be disturbingly clear. He called Karen's actions reckless and unjustified. He said no citizen had the right to enforce authority that did not exist. Then, without raising his voice, he issued his ruling. Karen was guilty of misdemeanor assault and criminal trespassing. She would be fined and placed on probation with mandatory community service. The restraining order would be extended. Any future violations would result in immediate jail time. Karen's face twitched. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she was too busy staring at Sarah, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if trying to understand how things had turned so far against her. I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. But then I remembered the look on Sarah's face when she gasped and stumbled backward at the barn gate, and all that pity vanished like dust in wind. After the court dismissed us, neighbors who had come to observe approached and offered soft words of support. Pete handed Sarah a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning, saying they reminded him of strength in unlikely places. Sarah smiled and thanked him, placing one hand protectively over her belly. As we stepped outside, the light felt different. Not just brighter, but warmer. Like justice had finally reached our little corner of the world. We walked back to the truck slowly. Sarah needed breaks every few minutes now, but she never complained. She said the courthouse had smelled like pencil shavings and old memories. I told her it smelled like Karen's last stand. We laughed, soft and tired. Then we climbed into the truck, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we could go home without bracing for another fight. But the surprises weren't over. As we drove past the HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance, we saw a new notice pinned to the post. It was an emergency meeting flyer. The HOA board was holding a vote to formally strip Karen of any remaining authority. A few of the names listed as sponsors were the very people she had once fined for minor offenses. Change was coming, and it had started with a single terrible act that Karen thought no one would stand up against. That evening, back at the ranch, we grilled dinner on the back porch. The goats wandered nearby, Captain standing proudly by the fence as if guarding us. Sarah leaned against my shoulder and whispered that maybe the baby would come early. I asked if that worried her. She shook her head and said no. This baby was being born into a place that had fought back against fear, against bullying, against someone who thought power gave her permission to hurt others. This baby, she said, was already strong. The stars came out slowly as the fireflies began to flicker along the fence line. We sat there until the food got cold, not because we forgot to eat, but because we didn't want to lose that moment. That feeling of peace returning. Of knowing we had drawn a line in the dirt and held it with grace and patience and truth. Karen might have been loud, cruel, and relentless, but the world had seen her clearly now. Not as a protector, not as a leader, but as a bully exposed by her own actions. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, truth speaks louder than any clipboard ever could. The morning Sarah went into labor, the world was quiet. No sirens, no shouting across fence lines, no Karen patrolling the gravel like a self-declared sheriff of the suburbs. Just birdsong, a soft breeze through the trees, and the steady sound of hooves as the goats shuffled lazily through the pasture. We had been preparing for this day, but nothing ever truly prepares you for the moment it arrives. I was helping refill the water troughs when Sarah called out from the porch, her voice calm but different, the kind of tone that carries weight behind it. "It's time," she said, one hand on the doorframe and the other on her belly. I dropped the bucket and crossed the yard faster than I thought a man my age could move. We had everything ready. The bag by the door, the car gassed up, and the hospital route marked with 2 alternate paths in case of traffic. But the roads were empty and the ride was smooth. Sarah barely winced as the contractions began. She looked out the window most of the way, watching the trees pass by, her hand resting on mine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in the long months leading up to this day. In every quiet moment, in every shared look when Karen's chaos tried to pull us apart, we had stayed steady. This was the final chapter of one story, and the start of another. At the hospital, everything moved quickly but gently. Nurses who spoke in soft tones, monitors that beeped with quiet urgency, and doctors who worked with precision and calm. I stayed by Sarah's side the entire time, holding her hand, brushing damp hair from her forehead, whispering that she was doing great, even when I wasn't sure if my voice sounded steady enough. Hours passed. Daylight faded. Then, in one breathtaking moment, it happened. The room filled with the sound of our daughter's first cry, raw and perfect and loud enough to remind the world that new life had arrived. We named her Lily. Not because of any grand symbolism or family tradition, but because when Sarah held her for the first time and looked down at her tiny face, she said the name as if it had always belonged to her. Lily. Strong, delicate, and rooted in the ground we had fought so hard to protect. I kissed Sarah's forehead and whispered that nothing else mattered now. Not fences or clipboards or courtrooms. Just this. Just us. Back at the ranch, things had continued to shift in quiet ways. While we were at the hospital, the HOA held their emergency vote. Karen was officially removed from any remaining involvement. A notice was taped to her door, signed by a unanimous board, stating that she was no longer permitted to act in any representative capacity and that her actions had caused irreparable harm to the community's reputation. Word spread quickly. Karen didn't come out for days. Her car didn't move from the driveway. The blinds stayed drawn. Some said she was planning to move. Others said she was trying to sue the HOA itself for wrongful removal. No one seemed too concerned either way. When we brought Lily home, it was early evening. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, and the goats gathered near the fence as if they sensed something had changed. Pete had tied a welcome home banner to the gate made from burlap and twine. It was crooked and frayed at the edges, but it made Sarah laugh. Inside the house, everything felt new again. The same rooms we had walked through 1,000 times now felt different. Warmer. Quieter. Full of life. Neighbors began dropping by in the days that followed. Some brought casseroles, others small handmade toys or books for Lily. Pete brought a goat-shaped plush he swore looked like Captain, though it was more blob than animal. Sarah smiled through every visit, tired but grateful. I watched her move through each day with grace I could never quite describe. She held Lily like she was made of light, whispered to her like they shared secrets no one else could hear, and walked our land like a queen returning to her rightful place. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from Judge Pickett. A handwritten note on simple paper. He congratulated us on the birth of our daughter, and added that it had been a long time since he had seen a courtroom so unified in silence during a testimony. He wrote that strength did not always show up in volume, but often in the choice to stand quietly and not back down. At the bottom, he had drawn a simple flower. A lily. No signature. Just the gesture. I framed it and hung it by the kitchen door. As the weeks went by, Karen's house went up for sale. A discreet sign at first, then an official listing in the paper. She moved out early one morning before dawn. No goodbye, no notice, just a quiet vanishing act. The house sat empty for a short while before a new couple moved in. Friendly, older folks with 2 large dogs and a small garden in tow. They waved the first time we passed them on the road. No clipboards, no demands, just 2 people looking for peace. I hoped they found it. One evening, just as the sun slipped behind the barn and the air turned cool, I stood at the fence holding Lily while Sarah planted new flowers near the porch. The goats grazed lazily nearby, and Captain nuzzled up against the fence post with a look that made me think he was still proud of what he had done that day by the ditch. I whispered to Lily about it, about the day her mother stood strong and a goat delivered justice. Her tiny fingers curled around my shirt, and I swore she smiled. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real and it was ours. We had stood against something mean and loud and cruel, and we had done it without losing who we were. And now, with Lily in our arms, with our land behind us and a future ahead, it felt like we had won something bigger than just a court case or a neighborhood dispute. We had reclaimed peace. We had built something rooted and true. And we were ready to grow it, one quiet day at a time.